Hello, beautiful people, and welcome back to Angelic Embrace, where we document and narrate the glorious and life-changing near-death experiences from people all over the world. So sit back, relax, know that you are loved, and let's get into today's near-death experience story. Consider subscribing and watching to the end to find out what happens. I had recently lost a pregnancy with twins when I was around 4 months along. The womb needed to be cleaned out, so they operated on me. As soon as the anesthesia wore off, I was thrown into a state of excruciating pain. I was in excruciating pain as a result of something pressing on what I already had inside of me. I was unable to interest anyone in what I had to say. At some point, they arrived and rushed to get me connected up to devices that would monitor my vital signs. After what seemed like an eternity, the medical staff in the ward eventually began operating on me as I was lying in bed. I couldn't bear the constant agony. It's possible that I went into shock since my blood pressure was at 0 and my pulse was either non-existent or too faint to detect. I suddenly discovered that I was floating above my body. When I looked down, I could see that the doctors and nurses were still working on me while I was lying in bed. I had the distinct impression that I had passed away, and I could make out a bright yellow light at the end of the tunnel. It was a really pleasant sensation, and the atmosphere was quite calm. There was no discomfort, simply happiness and anticipation. When I looked at my physique, I remember thinking to myself, there's no way I'm going back into that horrible low-life stuff. A beautiful woman's voice said, "What about Julie?" Just as I was walking towards the light and exiting the hospital ceiling. In the midst of my efforts to find the light, I had completely lost track of my daughter Julie, who was 4 years old at the time. After that, I felt as though I had been discharged back into my body, and then I went out. It was as if I had been shot via a pistol. I do not remember exactly when I came to, but by the time I did, the bed was virtually on its side, and I was forced to stand on my head in order to bring my blood pressure back up. After that, I explained to the nurses and anybody else who would listen that I had died and that I had come back from the hereafter. I informed them that I had returned. They just stated that it was a close call, and it appeared as though they were apologizing to the doctor while also expressing their desire to avoid legal action. The next segment of today's video will now begin. In the weeks that followed the passing of my father, not only had I been quite unwell with asthma, but I was also 18 weeks pregnant at the time. On this particular evening, I felt like I was going to collapse and I was short of breath. Because my husband worked the graveyard shift, my mother remained up with the kids and I until it was time for bed while my husband was away. When I finally came to, it was after 11:30 p.m., and I realized that I was in serious difficulty. I was unable to take a breath, and I was beginning to feel extreme anxiety. I reattached myself to the nebulizer and administered somewhere about 3 or 4 doses of my medicine. It did not have any impact whatsoever. I came to the conclusion that I needed to contact my mother in order to have her bring the children to where I was so that I could drive myself to the hospital. As soon as I dragged myself downstairs to wait for my mother, I realized that I could not possibly wait any longer. I could feel myself beginning to leave behind. I dialed 911 to request an ambulance. At the same time, both my mother and the ambulance arrived at the scene. I found that I was beginning to drift in and out of consciousness. During the time that they were working on me, I all of a sudden felt really peaceful and not terrified at all. In fact, I felt overwhelmed to urge my mother to convey to my children and my husband and mother how much I loved them. While all of this was going on within my head, the EMTs were working frantically to save my life while minimizing the risk of injury to my pregnant child. I was conscious of the fact that I was about to pass away, but I had an overwhelming sense of serenity despite this knowledge. After that, I blacked out and stopped breathing for a moment. I recall being surrounded by an overwhelming sense of love, and though I was unsure of its source, I was aware that it was present everywhere. I had the impression that I was in a passageway, and that there was a light at the end of it. It was the most eerie sensation. It seemed as though I was flying through the tunnel at an astounding pace, but at the same time, I could feel all that I had ever accomplished in my life, as well as everyone who had ever been important to me and whom I had ever loved. When I finally reached the peak, I was able to feel my father's love for me. I was unable to see him, but I knew he was there because he told me how much he loved me and how much he missed all of us, but that he was all right. In addition to that, he informed me that the moment was not yet right for me, that I already had 3 children and another was on the way, and that they all required their mother. It made me feel terrible since I wanted to remain at this breathtaking location. I was completely blind, yet it was a breathtaking experience anyway. Even though our thoughts were conversing with one another, neither my father nor I spoke to one another. After that, I was on my journey back to my body. But while I was going at extraordinary speeds, an unbelievable noise was whirling around inside of my mind. During the time that I was making my way back, a vision of myself appeared to me in which I was in the intensive care unit with my mother and husband sobbing and holding my hands. I could also see the doctor, the paramedics, and the nursing staff all working on me at the same time. They were about to intubate me at that moment. I was instantly transported back into my own body with a loud whoosh. I started to throw up just around the time that I had the sensation that I was returning to my body, and then I came to shortly after that. 2:30 a.m. was the time. I woke up after being asleep for 2 hours and 30 minutes. "I've seen the light," was the first thing I announced to both my mother and my spouse when I realized my mistake. Everyone was astounded to learn that I had come so dangerously near to passing away.